I was about 8 years old when this happened to me in late December of 2007. That was most likely one of the scariest things I have ever experienced in my life. To begin with, it was the Christmas season. I recall waking up early to receive my presents with my twin sister and my parents. A combo set of Simpsons movie figurines was one of my gifts. Essentially, it was a collection of the Simpsons figurines. It included the Simpsons movie as well. Before you scoff at the idea that an 8-year-old watches The Simpsons, let me tell you that my dad was an avid fan of the show. Together, we would watch every season and volume that he had purchased. Let's go back 2 nights. This happened, I think, on December 27th. I can only truly recall the things that happened at night. I can't really recall what transpired that day with clarity. My sister and I were unable to fall asleep for an unknown reason after our parents had put us to bed. I sneaked into her room to converse and play with toys because I couldn't sleep. Now it was possibly 11:45 in the morning, which was quite late past our bedtime. My sister and I quickly grew bored. Her plan to sneak into my parents' room and crash there to watch the Simpsons movie on their TV comes to mind, I recall. Given that we both knew they slept deeply and snored, we decided it would be a terrific idea. We also knew that sleeping in their room would not bother them. After turning out the lights in our rooms, my sister and I went to find our parents. That night, the chilliest thing I can still remember is how chilly it was. We were renting an old Victorian home without air conditioning at the time. I also recall how completely dark it was when we turned out the lights and entered the lengthy hallway. Back then, I wasn't a huge fan of the dark. To be honest, I found it difficult to fall asleep in my room, much less at night. We put the movie on and switched on the TV when we went into our parents' room. I wrapped myself up warm with my blankets. After the movie had been going on for about 45 minutes, I heard the downstairs cellar door bang. Our basement door is now quite hefty and substantial. To slam, you need a lot of force. I recall doing nothing but sitting still, feeling queasy in your stomach and being overcome with anxiety and terror. I had the feeling of a deer struck by headlights. I heard footsteps coming down the hall after the door slammed. They had the sound like a pair of heavy-duty set boots. My sister and I did nothing but sit. Then the footsteps approached the upstairs stairs. My parents' room would be the first room you see when you go upstairs. Therefore, the room we were in would be the first room this person would likely enter if they arrived upstairs. I heard nothing more after that. My sister and I felt as though we had been lying there for hours on end. The thing that frightened me the most was that I heard footsteps and saw no doors open or close, leading me to believe that they had left the house. That's when I recall reaching for the remote, shutting off the TV, and ducking beneath the covers. It was some time before I drifted off to sleep. My sister and I told our parents about it the following morning, but they didn't think we were serious. They dismissed it as easily as if it were a jar that had been pushed by the wind. I know someone came in and was there, but I still can't describe what happened that night. Growing up, I lived in a small town in a heavily forested area. In around 2nd grade, my best friend, who shall be known as Celia, began complaining to me about very strange things happening in her household. The first thing she pointed out to me was a small hole that was forming in the walls of her unfinished basement. The walls were made of a sort of brick block material, and the hole was forming in the mortar but expanding as if the bricks were crumbling. I remember asking Celia if her parents knew about this, and she said they weren't worried. Fast forward some odd years, and around 4th or 5th grade, the hole had only become larger over the years, and we could now fit a great deal of our arms into the hole. As far as my arm would go, we could not feel the end of the hole, and could not explain why it would corrode deeper into the house, but not get much bigger in girth. At this point, Celia also began telling me she could hear voices from her basement, and that she believed most of it was coming from the hole. I never heard any of these sounds when I would visit her house, but considering we were only 10 years old when this happened, I totally believed her. We frequently had sleepovers on weekends, which is when I was usually exposed to all of the creepy things wrong with her house. Her family was kind of strange in the fact that they had an abnormal number of animals. They had at least 6 cats and dogs, a few rabbits, birds, lizards, snails, frogs, fish, etc. Around the time when she was hearing the voices, we began noticing that her cats and dogs would randomly disappear and be found later in the basement standing right in front of the hole. In all the years I knew her and her animals, they had never liked to be in the basement. It started to really scare us, and she was telling me that she believed there was something living in the walls that could move around her house, but the hole was one of their ways out. At this point in time, I believed her but had never really seen enough proof to be as scared as she was. In school, she spent most of her time an anxious wreck, and the teachers and other classmates were really worried for her. It really seemed to me like her parents just didn't care or believe her. A lot of adults believed she was only anxious because of her much older sister having left for college. Now here's where we get to the really terrifying part. I was sleeping over at her house during the weekend of Christmas holiday. A slight note about Celia's room is that she has a huge collection of stuffed animals of all sizes, clearly because of her family's love of animals. Anyways, the first night we were sleeping in her bed, and when we woke up the next morning, we immediately saw that every stuffed animal, normally strewn about everywhere, was neatly arranged in a pile about 4 feet high. All the animals were facing us and staring right at us. I don't believe now, and didn't at the time either, that someone or Celia could have moved all those toys. I have always been an extremely light sleeper, and some of the animals were on top of a very large wardrobe. We both knew that whatever Celia believed to be living in the walls had to have been responsible for this. We put back all the animals very carefully and never told her parents. I sort of wished we had now. Since I was staying the entire weekend, we went again to sleep that night in her bed. We woke up at around the same time when it was still dark out. It must have still been the nighttime. We heard a very low creaking noise that was coming from underneath us. We both knew it was the wooden floors under her bed, just like in a textbook horror movie, and probably because we were only 10, we thought it was a good idea to lean over the edge of the bed and look under. Right as we looked, we saw and heard one floorboard slam back onto the ground. We shot our heads back up and held each other and cried. I have never been so scared in my life and called my parents the next morning to take me home right away. I refused to ever go back to Celia's house in fear, and she only got worse at school and home. I don't remember if I ever continued to ask her about the things in her house. Maybe I didn't because I was too scared, and we were just so young. For unrelated circumstances, my family moved far away from that town that summer. I had only seen her twice after that, and that was over a decade ago. I have never heard from her since, but have always wondered what happened, as I know her family still lives in that house today. All right, so this was about a year ago. In the heart of the very small city of Kalamazoo, I share a rather ancient house with 5 other people. The house next to mine, which is actually 3 apartments, and I share a driveway. I reside in a historic neighborhood where most of the properties are rather close to one another. A really pleasant woman, who I believe was in her mid to late 20s, resided in the top apartment. She constantly greeted my roommates and me when we were outside. We'd never taken the time to truly get to know her. Although we never truly made an effort to get to know her, we were always friendly neighbors. The neighbor from the top apartment stopped by with her boyfriend and their friend one summer day when we were all sitting on the front stoop smoking joints and drinking beer. We ended up chatting for a few hours and invited them in since they seemed like a friendly bunch. The boyfriend and friend appeared uneasy the entire time they were talking outside. They also looked greasy, had tattered clothes, and their friend had shaved off half of his mustache. We didn't give it much thought and dismissed them as dirty hippies because, well, in Kalamazoo, individuals who look like that are rather common. As soon as we were inside, we got to discussing jobs. We didn't call the neighbor or her boyfriend out on his phony claim that he was a chemistry instructor at a community college because we thought it was very shady. The neighbor and her boyfriend were also between jobs. As the night wears on, the friend chooses to stay while the neighbor and her boyfriend go. As we converse more, the friend begins to show a lot of interest in me. It's not a problem at all that he's a gay man, but because I'm not gay, I didn't really want to hang out with him. He was very seductive and continued stroking my legs and thighs, which made me feel very uneasy. At one occasion, I had background music playing in my room, but this guy came in and danced by himself for about an hour. I felt too uneasy to stay, so when he eventually goes, I lock my door and go from the house. I visit a friend. My girlfriend came with me too when I got back. I converse with one of my housemates. He and you both tell me that the guy has become even stranger. My roommate told him to go when he insisted on hugging one of our female friends, and eventually they had to push him out since she refused. Around 1 in the morning, we all go to bed. The next morning at 7 a.m., my roommate is heading downstairs with one of our friends that slept over. All he can find is a large bread knife when he wants to make a sandwich. We hadn't cleaned the dishes in a while, so she enters the kitchen, which also has the basement entrance. He noticed the friend guy waiting at our front door as soon as he entered the kitchen. The fact that my roommate is brandishing a sizable knife freaks the guy out a little. He tells my roommate that he got locked out and came into our house to sleep in the basement when she asks him why the hell he is standing in our kitchen. After hearing that, my roommate orders him to get the hell out, and he goes without hesitation. We then phone the cops to lodge a report. A bit later, we go down into the basement, and on the floor is a letter scrawled in chalk from the guy apologizing for sleeping in our basement, along with some disturbing drawings and the words, "Living Dead Boy." The message also contained both me and my roommate's names, which also kind of freaked us out. He had slept there the entire night and none of us knew. The cops came and took our info, and as that was happening, the neighbors came down from their apartment and were shocked that we called the cops. And I said something like, "Of course we called the cops. Your friend broke our house." Nothing more ever happened with the police. The people ended up moving out in a couple of months, and we never saw them again. My landlord also owns their apartment and told us that when they moved out, they left the place trashed, and he found a bunch of used needles and other paraphernalia. We were less than shocked.